Hello and welcome to the 11th edition of Table Talk, Airtable's weekly live stream answering all your questions about Airtable. So if this is your first time here, my name is Aaron Kornblatt. I'm going to be your host and hoping to answer a lot of questions today. So as I mentioned, this is our 11th episode. We've covered a lot of Airtable. We've gotten over 200 questions throughout that time, and I've really tried my darndest to answer all of them. So today what we're going to do is actually go back and try to answer a lot of those that we haven't had time to, that we thought were really interesting, and leave a lot of time to answer your questions. So go ahead and drop some in the chat. So there should be a URL that you can submit your questions to. And now would be a good time to kind of say hi in the chat. So if this is your first time here, make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. If you've been here for 11 sessions, I also want to go see a hi in the chat to thank you for taking the time this year to be a part of Table Talk. So hey, Amir, appreciate you coming on. So yeah, please go ahead, use the chat throughout. We have about, I think I have 5, 6 questions that I saw a few times in the past sessions that I want to answer, but we do have a ton of time at the end or throughout, frankly, to answer all of the questions that we haven't had time to answer. Now, as we were going through the questions, we got a lot of questions around our roadmap. So when will Airtable do X, Y, Z? And I think it's important that I start out by telling you all that at Airtable, no one trusts me with the roadmap. And the reason is because they know that I'd come here and spill it to all of you. So I will try my best to answer all of your questions. If they are about our roadmap, I will try to share what I know, but you have to know that the team doesn't really trust me with that information. But I promise you, when I know it, I try to share it here on Table Talk. So a few folks, Coolvone, hey, welcome back. Appreciate you joining, especially think for all of them. Really appreciate you coming. And I saw a lot of your questions. Really appreciate that. Hey, Colleen. Hey, Veronique. Welcome to Table Talk. I'm seeing some folks are asking roadmap questions. I'm not going to stop you from asking them. I just not always the right person to answer them, but when I do know the answer, I will give it to you. Cool. Okay, so let's jump in here with the questions that I've selected that are recurring, but going to try to get through as many as we can today. All right. So this is a question from Richard. So you'll notice that the first 3 are around interface designer. We got a ton of questions, a ton of interest. So I did want to go through that and answer as many as I can there. So first, how can I highlight editable fields in an interface? Then how can I filter for the current user in an interface? How can I send an email from an interface? And then kind of switching gears, we're going to talk about how can I consolidate data from multiple bases into one. That's from Im. And then final question for the ones I've selected, but again, not the final question I'm going to answer today. How can I create a form in Airtable? And more specifically, how can I pre-fill forms dynamically? So I do remember that question. So welcome, Zhao. Welcome, Amir, as well. Amazing. Lisbon, great place. I've been there twice, actually, and loved, as a Canadian, the weather there was quite special. And it was great to escape the cold we have here. Cool. So really appreciate all of you joining. Let's jump in and try to answer as many of these as we can. So first question from Richard on last week's Interface Designer Table Talk asked, how can we highlight editable fields in an interface? So for the first 3 questions, we're going to be jumping into this base, which is the same one we had a couple of weeks ago, where we're in a content management use case. And really the interface is they're helping approvers approve pieces of content. Right, so instead of exposing them to the the table here and all the different views, we want to give them an interface where they can approve the different pieces of content. So let's go into interface. Let's go into our content operations, go into content review. And the question here is, how do I identify as the interface builder which elements as a viewer you are able to edit, right? So I'm going to first show how do you make a field editable, right? So how do you allow the person looking at this interface to edit one field? And then maybe more generally, I think this was more the spirit of the question from Richard was, well, how do I tell that person, or how do I show the person that that information is in fact editable? So I'll give 2 tips around how to do that. Cool. So let's go into edit mode here by clicking right there. And the first thing you know is how do we make an element that we've added editable? So the way you do that is you select the element, and here you, in the edit access, you enable editing. Now every single element that you add has 2 visual representations. One, which you can view the information, and the related campaign field as it is today is only viewable. But then if you make it editable, there will always be a change in how that field looks in the interface to acknowledge, to show the user that they in fact can edit the information. So in this case, we're saying if you want to associate a piece of content to different campaigns, you can go ahead and add a record. Now, if I make it view only, you'll notice that that disappears because the end user cannot add a record or associate the content to a campaign. Now, we already have one that's editable here, right? So let's do that one more time. View only, it'll just say you who it's been approved by, and editable will make that information editable. So that is how you take a field and make it editable. Now, Airtable Interface Designer, by the way it's built, will indicate by changing the layout of the field whether in fact it is editable. But you can add a little bit more here. So let's say we want to add a label that says approved by. So if you turn on a label, it'll give a title, and I could say approved by, and then you could have an emoji, that says, hey, if I emoji in your base means that that information needs to be edited, or maybe a little danger. Let's see if I can find that. There we go. Just bringing the attention of the user in the interface to those fields is another way that you can tell your end user that they in fact can edit this information. And the last way is to group editable information together. Now, I'm not going to rejig this whole interface because we will be working in it quite a bit. But if you group things together and make them close, you can change the background. So your background is another way to indicate to the end user that they can edit the information in this interface. So those were 2 tips on how to make sure that things are, or how do you tell the end user of an interface that fields are editable. Now, because this isn't Ask Us Anything, I want to push this a little further because I do remember in Richard's question, there was a question of how do I make something required, right? How do I make a field required before they can continue? That's not possible in Interface Designer. And if you do have requirements around folks having to input information, that's usually when you create new records. In that case, I would point you to the form functionality, in which case you can make fields required. And we'll cover that in the last question for this Ask Us Anything. Great. Okie dokes. That was our first question. That was an interesting one. Boom. And now the moment most people come to Table Talk for. If you're new here, we check off the questions, mark them as answered, and then we get the most fun, we get the confetti. Fun times. All right. All right. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Make sure to submit them through the form. That way we can, kind of see all the questions and then prioritize them. And I did forget, probably one of the most, I don't know, most important, I've done this so many times now. There's a form in the chat as well where you can submit to get swag at the end. So there's a draw for Airtable swag. So if you've received it, let others know how cool it is. You can get an Airtable t-shirt, some socks, or different Airtable swag so everybody knows your allegiances and that you are an Airtable expert and an Airtable Table Talk attendee. Cool. Gotta love the confetti. So hey Reina, hey Stephanie, Nicole, great question. Do fill out the form so we can prioritize it and get it into today's agenda. Cool. Okay. Next question from Greg. How do I filter for the current user in an interface? Great question. So let's maybe generalize this question and talk a little bit about filtering in interfaces. So if I go back to my content operations hub, you'll notice that some elements have filters, right? So I can say what I want in this content review panel, this record picker, here on the left is I currently have 2 conditions, right? So this is saying when only show the content pieces that fit these conditions. And those conditions are the ready to review is checked, right? So that's our first condition. And then approver is the current user, right? So this is saying there needs to be 2 conditions. Ready for review is checked. And second, the approver is the current user. So that is the one way that you can filter based on the current user. So if you take a collaborator field in your filtering mechanism or your filter for that element, you can always select is the current user. So if I remove that, you'll notice that now I have all records, right? Not only those that I am the approver for. If I click back here and then go back into our filter, I add a condition, I make it an and, where approver is current user. And so that filters that down. Now, another way you can do is also to create a filter element. So you can add a filter element. Let's kind of add it here at the top. And let's imagine that we say where we just create this filter element. And then you could apply that filter to any element. And you can also make it dynamic for the end user, right? So if I go, okay, our filter is not where status, it's where approver. And I should link it to our assets table. And then I want the filter to be approver. Oh, I think it might be campaign. Is it content? Or is it content table? Apologies for that. And then I want the approver. And I could select current user. And then instead of filtering here, I can associate this to that filter from before. So I can connect it to this filter. These will be, could imagine doing this, and then connect it to that filter right here. What this enables as well is to allow that end user to kind of select who they want this filtering mechanism to be filtered through. So this is just 2 different, one you could always say, okay, only show content where it's the current user, which is perfect if you just want people to land on this interface and see the records that are relevant to them. Or if you want to create a dynamic filter where they can see, okay, show me the things that I need to review, or show me the things that Jeff needs to review, or Michaela, or whoever you're working with, is another way of filtering. So hopefully that explains how the filtering mechanism works, and you're able to make it dynamic. So Richard, I don't know if you're in the chat. I know that this was a question from last week. So hopefully that answered that. And last note here is that when you have a record here, so here our record element, right, this is also tied to whatever record is picked. So that's not a filtering for the current user, but it is another filtering mechanism. I feel like I've maybe confused folks more than I've helped, but let me know in the chat if there are any questions around filtering, and I'm happy to talk about the peculiarities of that as well. Cool. Okie dokes. All right, we're flying through these. All right, our favorite moment. All right. My favorite moment of the week as well. Okie dokes. Our third question, and this is a great question from Tanya. How do I send an email from an interface? Yeah, so this is a really good question. You could imagine a world in which you want to, maybe email prospects when you've put them into some kind of category. Maybe you want to email an approver once their piece of content has been approved. And you want to do that from the interface you're looking at. Now, based on the context I got from Tanya's question, which had a little more here, was, can I automate an email based on something I'm doing in the interface? And what's important to remember, if we go back to this interface, is that everything that happens here, or any information that gets updated, is information updated in your Airtable base. And from there, you can actually schedule or automate emails. So let's imagine what we want to do is when someone marks, let's go into preview mode, and someone says, hey, I have approved this piece of content, we want to send the content owner an email letting them know that that's the case. So in fact, we've automated an email based off of something that happens in an interface. But the underlying principle that you have to remember is that any information updated in your interface updates the underlying base, and you could automate emails from the underlying base. So let's go into the base structure and imagine how we would send the email. So when content is approved, so when this field is updated, so when it's no longer empty, we want to go ahead and send the owner of this piece of content in the content table a notification letting them know that their content has been approved. So let me go back into the base. Let's go into our content table. And okay, so I see the Tanya's question. So I'll finish this one and then I'll get to the actual question. But that's okay, we'll answer that one as well. So let's imagine that I want to send the owner, whenever this field goes from nothing to being filled out. So in this case, let's say assets for podcast promotion. Let's say Geo approves this. It's going to send an email to myself, or to Aaron in this case, letting them know that, like, hey, assets for podcast promotion has been approved. So let's go ahead and schedule that automation. So I'm going to go into automations. I'm going to create a custom automation. So asset has been approved email. We're going to save that. So our trigger is going to be when our record matches certain conditions. In this case, we're saying, okay, it has to be first approved by, and imagine it has to be ready for review as well. So let me skip, so I have one at least. So ready for review is checked, and that is one of the conditions for it to surface in our interface. And then second, approved by has to be filled out. So those are going to be the two conditions a record has to match in order for our email to be sent. So we're going to say when record matches conditions, there's going to be an email, record in our content table. And the two conditions are the ones I mentioned. So ready for review is checked. And then second, where approved by is not empty. So those are the two requirements for this email to be sent. Let's go ahead and then send the email. And so who do we want to send the email to? So I want to send it to the owner of the asset. So this right here is a collaborator field. So when you go into our step one, so this is the record that triggered the automation, I can go into owner. Let me search for that. And owner has, if I click continue, has a few elements. I can get the name. So if I want to say, hey, Aaron, your content has been approved. But here I want to put it to the email so that the automation knows who to send it to. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that. So this is taking not the name, but the email behind this owner, this collaborator field, is who we want to send it to. And I'm going to say your content piece, and inserting, actually, maybe even better, let's do just the name. Let's be precise. Let's go the name right here. Name has been approved by, and then we want the name of the approver. So that's approved by. There we go. And here we don't want the email, we want the name. Insert that. So hi, just going to put my name as well. And then owner. We're not getting, oh, I'm hiding it. Oh no. There we go. Hope I didn't, there we go. There we go. And name, insert, your piece, your content piece has been approved. And then let's go URL of record. You can make this a little fancier by, adding a link directly. Boom. Okay. And even you can add an image, right? So you can even add the image of the attachment. So let's add the main attachment. There you go. Okay. So let's test this out. Let's make sure it does what we expect it to do. So I'm going to run a test. Let's see which record it comes back with. There we go. It came back with on-demand app homepage. Here we go. And this is going to send an email to Michaela, letting Michaela know that I am their approver. Let's go. And then let's preview this email. It says, hi, Michaela, your content piece has been approved, and then the URL of the record. And that is how you would run this automation. So what happens here, let's go turn this on. Let's go back into our interface, put our hat of an interface user. And let's go and edit this one. Right, so let's publish because we've made some changes. Great. And let me go ahead and say, okay, well, blog workout routines. That's one I'm the approver for. So I'm going to go ahead and set that as approved. And this is going to go ahead and change the underlying information in my base. So going back to my base here, if I go to blog pandemic right here, it should have sent an email to Harley letting them know that I have approved their piece of content. And in fact, we see that it's run successfully and that is the record we ran on. And that is how you should think about having messages being automated from an interface. So reminding you, or the reminder of what to remember here is that changes in the interface change information in your Airtable base. And from the underlying base, you can trigger automations from that, including sending emails. So that's how to think about it. And the question from Tanya was actually, so if I'm reading here, so how do you send it out to a user without having them, be signed in? So if you want them to access the interface, the charts and the things on the interface, they need to be signed in and need to have access to the interface, and you have to share it with them. That said, if you want to bring attention to someone, to information in an interface, right, based on things that happen in an Airtable base, maybe you want to send an email every month to say, hey, we've just updated the interface. You can schedule that, and you could have those based on things that happen in Airtable, but you can't send an email with charts automatically from an interface. But yeah, it seems like that automation tip was useful to some folks. So think about interfaces just like you would think about changes to the underlying base. And you could use the whole suite of Airtable automations in order to update or to do any type of automation on top of. Cool. Boom. All right. Fun times. Okay. If you haven't filled out the swag form, now's a good time. If you haven't submitted a question and have one, now's a good time. We are about, near halfway there, and we've got quite a few questions to go through. Okay, and so I'm actually gonna. Daniel and Im have similar questions, so I'm gonna group these two and answer these similarly, right? So in one go, we're gonna do 2 confettis after this one, which is new. So The question is from Im, how can I consolidate data from multiple bases into one? And the question from Daniel is, what is the rule of thumb to create new bases instead of putting in more tables? So let me answer Daniel's question. So how to think about bases versus new tables, how to think about whether or not you should start a new table or a new base. So bases are perfect for the totality of one workflow, right? So whenever you have information that's related to each other, your ideal situation is to have them in one base. So maybe you're doing a project, right? And that project has tasks, and you want to go ahead and have your projects and your tasks one next to each other. And you might say, well, I have a new project. Do I use the existing base or do I new a new base? Now, the default should be, let's put it into an existing base, right? Because that puts all of your information into one place and makes that information easily accessible. Now, maybe that's not ideal, but the way you should think about is this project similar to the other projects that I'm working on? Because in Airtable, you have structured information, you have fields, you have tables. If that project is wildly different, maybe it's managed by another team, maybe it doesn't fit, then in that case, you should think about maybe using a new base. But in most situations, for information that is similar, you should be thinking about using the same base. So one example often that people will think about is like contacts, right? They'll say like when someone becomes a lead becomes a full-fledged client, should we switch the base and create a new base? Well, in that case, I would say only create a new base if the workflow once you become a client is wildly different, doesn't have the same information. If not, try as much as possible to consolidate into one base. Now, the natural next question is, well, what if I have multiple bases? Maybe I have multiple projects that are being worked on, multiple work streams that I want to consolidate and get overview on. So in this situation, let's kind of put ourselves into the shoes of, maybe I have two content work streams. Now, just for purpose of explanation, I'm going to assume that the bases are identical, but you can imagine they're slightly different, right? So I have content coming from one team, and then another team is also creating content. Let's use campaigns, right? Because let's use campaigns. I've already done content. Let's imagine I have campaigns from two different maybe geographies or two different bases I can't have them see information from another. For whatever reasons, I have campaigns in two different bases, and I want oversight over all of the campaigns so that I get one single source of truth and each one of those teams can work in their own bases. So in that situation, I would recommend using Airtable Sync so you can aggregate information from the two bases into one. So let me go into my home workspace here, and we're going to create a new base. So I have one base here, which is our campaigns table, and then ask us anything, which is, you can see a little 2 there, which is our second content or campaigns base. I want to aggregate these two into one base so I get oversight over both. So let me go into here. I'm going to go ahead and add a base. We're going to call this content or campaign overview. I'm going to go ahead and add a new table. Let me close out this little in product help center. And I'm going to sync data from an Airtable base. So as a reminder, there's the table talk we did all about sync, but sync lets you share information across bases. It's a one-way sync, so any updates that happen in your source table will be synced to your destination table. And this will be a destination table. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the URL, right? You can select if you're a collaborator on it. I always find it easier just to go here, share view. I've got allow data to be synced to other bases. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste that URL. Coming here, next. I want all fields in the source. Let's go ahead and create that table. Now I have all of my records from one of that campaign table. And if anything is updated here, it gets reflected here. So let's say celebrity workout series, our ending is currently January 21st. Let's say, you know what, that's 28th. Let's update that. Now I'm going to go ahead and sync now. This happens every 5 minutes on your end. There we go. and now it's updated automatically. So that's how, imagine I just wanted oversight over that one workflow, but in our case, we want oversight over two bases. We also want oversight over this one. Let me actually change the color here. That way we could differentiate the two, right? So I also want these records to be synced. So I want to aggregate those two bases into one that I get oversight on. Well, the workflow isn't that different. I'm going to go ahead and share that view, allow data to be shared to other bases. I'm going to copy paste this new URL. So just copying that, coming over here. And then instead of adding a new table, I'm going to go ahead and say add records from another source. Now, maybe you want to aggregate across different tools, right? Whether that's Jira, Google Calendar, Google Drive, Box. But in my case, my second, not external, but second source of information will be another Airtable base. So I'm going to copy paste that URL. I'm going to paste it. There we go. And then it says, okay, well, I already have this information in this table that you're syncing to. Can you tell me what the fields, the information from your source, how do they map to your destination? In our case, that's very easy because they all have the same name. So Airtable is smart enough to know all of those. But if you go to our table talk where we did sync, I sourced one from Google Drive and then another from Box. And those had different pieces of information that I needed to map to. I think it was Airtable and Box. So Airtable and Box, and I needed to map those fields. But in this case, I know that these are mapped properly. I can add the source. And now I have all of those. So whether things change here or things change here, I am able to get overview over that information in one base where I've synced all of that information. So coming back to the original question, when do you create a new base versus a new table? In most cases, you probably want to create a new table for separate workflows that you do want to keep distinct, either because they're very different or because there's a reason you don't want to give access to people to all the information. You can create two bases and then use Airtable sync from multiple sources to be able to aggregate that if you so want to and get oversight over those different bases. Whew. Okay. Well, for the first time in Table Talk's history, we've gone ahead and answered two questions at once. So we're going to get one slightly larger confetti here. Great work, everyone. Okay. Seems like while we're answering questions live, there's also some questions being answered in the chat, which is super exciting. So appreciate folks double duty, watching and answering. So really appreciate that. Okay. We've got a question from Hallie, which is, how can I create forms in Airtable? How can I pre-fill forms? Believe it or not, 11 sessions of Table Talk, I don't think we've created a form yet. So we saw this question from way back. And so we thought, ask us anything is a good moment to talk about forms. And we got a lot of questions around pre-filling forms, which I totally understand and want to answer here as well. Before I get into it, do a reminder, if you still have questions, we've got good number, 15, 20 minutes here. So feel free to drop them into the form. It's a little meta that I'm pointing you to a form while talking about a form. But do go ahead and ask, so we do have some time. Cool. How can I create? Okay, yeah, sorry, zone that for a moment. Okay, how can I create forms in Airtable? So I'm gonna bring you to another base, which is an event planning base. So just quick overview. Let's imagine that we have attendees for our event that we're holding, keeping in a table. And we want to go ahead and create a form where folks can, register their attendance for our event. Now, to create a form, so you go to your table, and by default, that form will allow you to answer or allow that will have the different fields already in this table. So to create one, go into your view sidebar and then click on create form. Now, I've already got one here, but I'll walk you through all the different things you can do in a form. So this will create it similar to this, and you can go ahead and edit it. So I'll actually go through the options in a moment, but what's important is that it'll create a URL that folks can go to. And when this form is filled out, information is automatically added to your Airtable base. So they can add their name, their company, their title, email address, and phone number. So let's go ahead and kind of think about how you can configure this. So first, you can add any image in the background, have some image you can update here, some text. And then by default, you can select which fields you want to appear on this form. So let's imagine that your company ultimately is not something that I want. So I'm removing it and putting it here. So all fields that appear here do not appear in your form. But if you say you change your mind, you can always bring it back and decide its order. You can give each question a description. So in this case, we're saying your company, but I can also put it as a question. So what company do you work for? And then maybe a little context, we use this information so we can place you into the right sessions. There you go. So I've changed the name. Now note that this doesn't change the name of your field. Your field will still be named company right here. You can set it as required. And then to make it easier, instead of dragging, you can actually click here. That's actually something I didn't know and I'm learning about now. So we're always learning here on Table Talk. And I'll talk about conditional in a moment. So then you can add the fields and then some options at the bottom. You can decide on the Pro plan whether you want to show Airtable branding, redirect to different URLs, have a custom message, and then a few notes about either emails or what to redirect to. So these are broadly the options that are available to you. Now the next question, and if there are any questions, I'm not going to get into conditional formatting unless folks in the chat let me know if that's interesting to someone. So these are showing questions only when certain conditions are met. So I can get into that if there's some interest from the chat. But the question we got was, how do I pre-fill a form? So let's imagine I know that I'm sending this to our favorite guests or attendee, Kuovone, and I want to send them this form with their name pre-filled because I know their name. So I'm going to go ahead and open that form. Now this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because I can't show you the URL. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to be a little innovative here. I'm going to paste it here, and this is the URL, right? Because you don't see the URL. So how do we pre-fill a form with some information that we already know? So how we do that is in the URL, we're going to add a pre-fill to let the browser know. So when someone enters that URL, Airtable is going to be like, oh yeah, this information is pre-filled. So it's go ahead and go pre-fill. So I'm just changing the URL. So the first thing I did is I added a question mark. So this right here is the URL. I'm adding a question mark. And then I'm saying, putting the word pre-fill to let Airtable know that there's a field that needs to be pre-filled, underscore, and then the structure is name of field. So in this case, it's name, because that's the name of the field, and then equal the value that I want to pre-fill. So it's going to be Kuovone, like that. And so if I enter this URL, if I've done this correctly, which I have about 75% chance that I've done this correctly, if I enter this URL into the URL bar, this name field will be pre-filled with Kuovone, like that. So I'm just copy pasting this into the URL, as you can see. And if I enter that, I want to leave indeed, we see that the name is pre-filled. And woo, I appreciate that, Alex. I wouldn't put too much money on that. Let's try something harder and see if I can get it as well. So the next one, let's say I want to pre-fill 2 fields. So not only do I know what company Kuovone, what their name is, but I also know what company they work for, and I want to pre-fill that as well. So it's just a copy pasting here so I can show it to you. So then I'm putting an ampersand. I think that's what that's called. There are a lot of pitfalls, how to spell, how to write this URL. And then the structure, which I always forget. So here, I also want to pre-fill a second field. In our case, it's the field company. So then I go again, pre-fill underscore company. That's the name of this field right here. Equal. Now, I don't know what company Coolvon works for, so I'm just going to write, greatest. Greatest. Sure, that's the name of the company. It's greatest. And hopefully this worked as well. So if I copy paste that, you can see I'm just copying and pasting it into the URL bar, press enter, and greatest. So yeah, so very simple structure. Go ahead and pre-fill underscore the name of the field equal what you want to pre-fill with. And if you have multiple, then you have that same structure with the ampersand, and then pre-fill name of the field, what you want to pre-fill with. Now, a few parting words. This works with single select. If you put a space, it should work as well. And if you are linking to a linked record field, so if you want to pre-fill a linked record field, you can either use the name, so the primary field of that linked record, or you can use the record ID. And if you want to dynamically create these URLs based on information in your base, so let's imagine I have an attendee and I want to create a form that pre-fills all of this information, you can create a formula field. And to make that easy, we do have an app in our marketplace. So form, and it was built by Coolvon, obviously. So ready-made formulas, pre-filled forms. There we go. This is the one I'm thinking about. So if you want to pre-fill a form based on information in your base, but don't want to go through the hassle of writing out that formula, it is a hassle. I've done it before. You can use this app that will generate the formula. You'll just have to copy paste into your Airtable base. So yeah, URL encode, and there's a few edge cases here, which I'll point you to the community, where I'm sure Coolvon did a great job of answering that question and building out the app. So really appreciate that for folks like myself who have a high probability of making a mistake when writing out that formula. Cool, so we started very simple and then got a little complex there. So great question, Hallie, thanks a lot. And hopefully we've answered it across all levels of complexity here. All right, so Tanya, great that we're able to inspire you a little bit in Airtable and show you some complexity and some cool things you can do with Airtable automations, forms, interfaces, all the good stuff. Cool. Last question, but again, never too late to submit your question. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. And so actually, this might be a good moment. So next week, I'm really excited to announce we've got Andrew Ofsted, co-founder of Airtable, that's going to be on the show for our year in review. So next week, we're going to go through everything that we launched over the year. And we're going to start off with an interview with Andrew, and it's going to be super exciting. So hope you'll tune in to that next week, same time next week. Yeah, this is before we jump into our penultimate question. We've got some more. Okay, so I'd like to add headings and lists to my base description. Can I use Markdown? Great question, Penny. And the answer is yes. So let's say I want to add a base description, right, into this table talk, which I haven't done. So let me go ahead and say, table talk is a weekly live stream where an Airtable expert most of the time, in most areas, I would say, not 100%, answers your questions. Now, when is table talk? And let's imagine I want to make this into a header. So if I go click here, I can see which different types of Markdown are supported where. So folks who are not familiar with Markdown, Markdown is just a way in the text itself to signal whether you want something bold or underlined or H1 or something like that. Now you might be familiar with Markdown if you've ever been in a rich text field. Just as an example. And so this is some text. And then when you're selecting, you can select whether you want it to be bold, italic, strike through. Now Markdown is just a way of saying that, but without having to click on it. So let me delete this field, going back here. And let's say I want to make this in H1. I believe the syntax will be this. And this is saying, okay, when someone is looking at this base description, make this large. So if I go here, and I did not do it properly, I think there's might be a space there. There you go. And you see when it actually shows it to the end user, the person looking at the appearance, it shows it as an H1. And if I want to make something bold, I'm taking risks here. This might be bold or italic. I do not remember. So Alex, let me know in the chat if I am correct. Italic. So one star will, on each side of the word or whatever text you want to put italic, we'll make it italic. And so it does support Markdown like that. And you can see all the different types of Markdown that are supported across different places right here. So, and there's linked to different documentation here. Yeah, so actually no, so sorry, this is the formatting and this is where it's supported, right? So headings are supported across all surface areas, strike through in Airtable automations, web clipper, and the API, but would not be supported in the base description. So bonus points for whoever can guess, you know, what Alex's message would look like in a base description. I'm not sure what underline is. I think that's bold, if I'm not mistaken. Where's the underline? This is bold, so it would be bold and italic. There you go. Okay, cool. Oh no, so yeah, it would be, okay, got it. So two underscores is bold and 2 stars is bold, and then 1 is italic. Okay, got it. Amazing. Cool. Well, Penny, hopefully that answered your question. Let me know in the chat. If it didn't, happy to go a little further into Markdown. Yeah. So Raina asked the question, if I share multiple, so last question here, I do, you know, feel free to submit some more. We do have a little bit of time. Yeah, actually we have 5 minutes, so maybe this will be the last question, but do submit it and I'll try to answer it as quickly as I can. If I share multiple interfaces to one person, is there a way that these interfaces can be combined to just one interface? I mean, get them all in just one link. So if we're starting from the assumption that you have multiple interfaces, if they're under a group interface, right? So let's say you have multiple interfaces that are part, oops, sorry, I didn't want to go there. Let me go back here. And let's say in this case, I go into interfaces and then I have here, and then let's say you have multiple interfaces here, you can share this link and that'll bring that person to the interface group where they can go to multiple interfaces. Now, if the question is, can I send, so this would be the one link you would send someone to give them access or show them, or link them, I should say, to all the interfaces that are part of a group, and a base can have multiple interface groups, right? So if I go back to the base and I go to interfaces, I can have multiple groups for the different types of stakeholders I work with or different types of interfaces I want to build. And here you'll have all of those that relate to this. Now, if you have multiple interfaces that, frankly, one user is using, you can maybe try to consolidate them into one interface, right? So kind of think about it as like, we want to give this person everything they need in one interface, but there is no way to kind of say, here's a link to all of your interfaces. However, and last note this, and this might be the why this question kind of come up, you can see all the interfaces you have access to at the top of your homepage. So you don't need to curate, you don't need to create one link for all those. whenever you have access to an interface, you can see all of them at the top of your home airtable.com. So at the top of all of your workspaces, all of your interfaces. Try to say that 10 times. Great. Right, and Kuvan has a great point, and I think I lose points for not thinking about this. You can have a button that links to your other interfaces in an interface. So you can create a button field that has the URL of the interface that you want to link to, and then add that to your interface. Solutions, so many options, so many ways to do this cool stuff. Okay, all right, well, let's do confetti one more time for today, and then I'll talk about what's on. So we got to do swag. So don't forget now, like I haven't talked about, I'm going to do this slowly so you have time to fill out the swag form. So go ahead and fill that out now. We're going to take a moment here and just take our time giving this confetti. Just going to slowly drink my water just to give everyone the time to get that. All right. I feel like we've been patient. Okay. So let's do our, so I'll talk about next week, then we'll do the draw. So next week, again, we've got Andrew Ofsted, co-founder of Airtable, coming on to the show, talking about, everything we've launched in 2021. And then we're going to do a review of things like timeline view, Gantt view. Can you believe it? That was 2021 as well. So many new automations, interface designer, multi-source sync. We're going to recap all of that next week. And if you have suggestions for what we should do in 2022, feel free to let me know, aaron@airtable.com. I'm so excited about everything we're going to do in 2022 in terms of Table Talk, in terms of things that you want to see on Table Talk. Again, no visibility onto the roadmap. So if you have any thoughts about what we should do on Table Talk for 2022, email me at aaron@airtable.com. Cool. Okay, let's do our draw, our swag, the moment everyone has been waiting for. Let's go into the script that I wrote. All right, let's see if I got this right. Okay, are we ready? How are we feeling? All right, Ryan Dale is the winner of Airtable swag this week on Table Talk. So Ryan, you should already see an email in your inbox letting you know how you can get that swag. Yeah, so huge thanks. That's it for this 11th episode of Table Talk. We'll be back next week for the last Table Talk of the year. We're going to be talking to Andrew Ofsted about all the things that we've launched this year. So do tune into that, and I hope to see you next week. And as always, if you have questions about all the things we launched this year, feel free to submit that. And I'd love to hear your ideas on what we should do on Table Talk in 2022. That's aaron@airtable.com. So really appreciate all of you joining. Thank you, Jeff, Raina, Ryan, Rock and Roll, Penny, Coolvone, Stephanie, so many folks joining. Alex, always there. Appreciate all of you joining, and I'll see you back next week for the final Table Talk of the year. Really appreciate that, and I'll see you back next week. Bye, everyone.